The summer of 1902 in rural Texas was a summer remembered for its merciless heat, the kind of heat that pressed down like an invisible weight, smothering every movement, baking every road into cracked clay, and leaving the air shimmering with mirages that made the horizon seem alive with ghosts. In the small farming town scattered across the Brazos River Valley, men rose at dawn with sweat already pooling beneath their hats. Women stood over kitchen stoves despite the suffocating heat, and children ran barefoot on ground so hot it stung their souls. The land was weary, and so were its people, battered by years of drought and the suffocating grip of the Great Depression. But in that time, when food was scarce and money scarcer, it was the church that held the community together, offering sermons of hope, songs that carried through the dust-heavy air, and gatherings that reminded the people that they were not alone in their suffering. And so, when the preacher announced that the annual church picnic would not be canceled despite the hardships, but rather expanded into a full-day celebration along the riverbank, no one dared to decline. The promise of food, laughter, music, and a brief reprieve from the gnawing worry of unpaid debts and empty cupboards was too much to resist. Families packed what they could. Jars of home-pickled cucumbers sealed with wax, loaves of cornbread baked in iron skillets, hams smoked over pecan wood, and churns of butter wrapped in damp cloth to keep them cool. Wagons rattled down the dusty paths, horses flicking their tails at swarming flies, while children perched excitedly on the edges, baskets on their laps, their faces glowing with anticipation of a day where they would run free, splash in the river, and eat until their bellies ached. The cottonwood trees that lined the Brazos seemed to stretch their branches wider that morning, offering free patches of shade, and the grass that grew thick and high along the riverbank whispered in the warm wind, as though it too knew that this day was meant for something beyond the ordinary. Blankets were spread, tables set up with boards laid across barrels, and the air soon filled with the mingled aromas of fried chicken, boiled peanuts, fresh-baked pies, and strong coffee poured from tin kettles. Parents laughed easily for the first time in months, their worries drowned out by the music of fiddles and harmonicas, while the children, nearly 100 of them in total, raced barefoot through the fields, their shrieks of joy carrying like bells across the slow-moving water. They darted between the trees, leapt from rocks, tumbled through the grass, their hair wild and their cheeks flushed, and even the most weary mothers could not help but smile at the sight, though their hands clutched their rosaries and their eyes sometimes drifted to the shadows beyond the tree line. For though the picnic glowed with the warmth of fellowship, there was unease rippling beneath the surface, quiet as a snake sliding through tall weeds. Whispers had spread that morning, carried by women with hushed voices and men who refused to meet each other's eyes. Some spoke of strange riders seen before dawn, figures cloaked in dust, moving silently along the ridge, watching the town but never approaching. Others swore that in the nights leading up to the picnic, pale shapes had been seen along the riverbanks, tall and thin, their outlines flickering in the moonlight, like figures caught between shadow and flame. A farmer's wife muttered that she had woken to hear children's laughter outside her window long after midnight, though all her children slept soundly in their beds. An old man recalled hearing songs in the wind, strange hymns sung backward, notes stretched and broken, as if carried from another world. The oldest women, bent and wrinkled, clutched their beads tightly, their lips moving in constant prayer, muttering that the year itself was cursed, that 1932 had been marked by God for sorrow. They remembered the locust swarms, the blighted crops, the fever that had carried off infants in the spring, and now this gathering of so many souls in one place seemed to them less like a celebration and more like a lure waiting to be snapped shut. But still, no one dared leave, for the preacher stood tall in his pressed black suit, his hair slicked back, his Bible heavy in his hand, declaring with fiery certainty that this was God's day of fellowship, a day meant to remind them that faith thrived even in hardship, that laughter could rise even from dust, that the river itself was proof of providence flowing in the wilderness. His words carried weight, for this was a man who had buried too many of their children, married too many of their daughters at too young an age, and preached at too many graves dug too shallow in the hardened earth. When he said God had ordained joy, they clung to it with trembling hands, and so they stayed, spreading their blankets, passing their food, singing hymns that lifted into the blazing sky, their voices mingling with the cicadas that droned endlessly from the trees. Mothers wiped sweat from their foreheads with handkerchiefs. Fathers slapped each other's backs and spoke of better harvests to come, while the children, free from every care, played along the river's edge, their reflections rippling in the slow current. The preacher's wife led the Sunday school children in song, their high voices ringing with purity, though to some it sounded almost mournful, as if the river itself was echoing them with a voice too deep and old. Dogs barked at nothing, staring into the woods with hackles raised, only to slink back and hide beneath wagons when no one followed them into the dark. A baby wailed in its mother's arms, inconsolable despite every lullaby. The fiddler, who had been hired to play tunes of joy, broke a string without reason, the sound snapping sharp as a whip through the air, and for a moment conversation fell silent. Yet laughter returned quickly enough, as though no one dared linger on omens. The smell of roasting meat drifted across the fields, mingling with the sweetness of molasses pies, and plates clattered as people feasted, grateful for abundance even if only for one day. And through it all, the children continued to run, their joy unbroken, their games endless, as if some unseen hand urged them to laughter, to wear themselves out before dusk. No one marked the hour. No one marked the gathering shadows stretching longer across the grass, and no one, save the oldest, who crossed themselves beneath their breath, truly believed that this day, shining so brightly against a year of misery, would be the last time they ever saw their children alive. By late afternoon, the church picnic had reached its golden height, the kind of hour where the air grew thick with the mingling scents of food, grass, and river water, where laughter drifted easily across the shade, and where parents, for the first time in months, loosened their shoulders and allowed themselves to believe that perhaps God had not forgotten them. The fiddler played on with repaired strings, the preacher's booming laugh rose above the crowd, and the mothers passed peach preserves across long tables as if nothing in the world could interrupt this peace. It was then that the Sunday school teachers, two middle-aged women with wide hats, their cheeks pink with heat and devotion, proposed a game for the children, something to harness their restless energy and keep them entertained while the adults settled into their late meal. It was to be a scavenger hunt, an old tradition, where the children would scatter into the nearby woods to collect pine cones, smooth river stones, wildflowers, and feathers, racing to see who could return with the full basket. The idea was met with cheers from the little ones, their eyes sparkling at the thought of running deeper into the trees, of racing freely under the canopy where the sun dappled the ground, in shifting golden patterns. In total, 97 children gathered, barefoot and eager, clutching their little baskets and tin pails, their voices shrill and sweet as they chattered among themselves. The Sunday school teachers reminded them not to stray too far, to stay in groups, to listen for the church bell that would signal the end of the game. Their words were met with nods, though no child truly heard them, for the thrill of the hunt had already captured their imagination. And so, with a shouted command, they scattered like sparrows flushed from the grass, their laughter spilling into the woods as they disappeared one by one into the green shadows, leaving behind a hush that fell heavily over the camp. The parents, at first, paid little mind. They poured lemonade into tin cups, wiped their brows with handkerchiefs, and returned to conversations about failing crops, the new tax assessments, and the endless worry of debts. Some men leaned back against against wagon wheels with cigars clamped between their teeth, watching the smoke curl lazily upward. Mothers rocked babies in their arms, lulled by the sudden quiet. It seemed natural enough, at first, that many children gone at once, leaving the air strangely hollow, but with the promise they would soon come rushing back, voices shrill and feet pounding the earth. Yet, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, lengthening the shadows across the picnic grounds, unease began to stir. An hour passed, then another. The scavenger hunt, meant to last 30 minutes at most, had stretched into eternity. The bell was rung, its clang echoing across the river, but no small figures came darting out of the woods. The parents began to call out lightly, their tones still playful, coaxing, "Sarah! David! Time to come on back now." But their voices met only silence, swallowed by the rustle of leaves. Another hour slid by, and the laughter that drifted from the woods was nowhere to be heard. At first, a handful of fathers rose, grumbling about disobedience, and went to the tree line to holler into the darkening underbrush, expecting to see flushed cheeks and guilty smiles running back. None came. The mood shifted like a storm cloud sweeping over the gathering. Mothers sat up straighter, their hands frozen on spoons, their eyes darting to the tree line with growing dread. Babies whimpered uneasily. A breeze carried across the river, cool against the sweat-soaked skin, but it brought no sound of children, no breaking branches, no telltale shrieks of play. The search began quietly enough. A dozen men with lanterns and shotguns fanning out into the woods, while others built fires to keep the women and younger children calm at camp. The woods, however, swallowed them. The men shouted until their throats grew raw, their lanterns swinging through the thick brush. But no answering call came, no rustle, no cry, no footprint. Even in the softest earth. They returned hours later, faces ashen, sweat streaking the dust on their cheeks, muttering of how there seemed to be no trace, no broken twigs, no trampled grass, no baskets dropped in haste. It was as though the 97 children had been lifted into the air by unseen hands and carried away. Panic began to grip the mothers first. One fell to her knees, sobbing, clawing at the dirt with her bare hands as though she might dig her child out of the earth. Another collapsed against the preacher's wife, wailing prayers to the heavens. Soon the camp erupted into hysteria, shouts rising, torches lit, more men plunging into the woods. Yet with every frantic search came only silence, broken only by the cicadas screaming in the branches above. As midnight fell, the woods grew heavy with shadows, the darkness pressing against the lamplight, and whispers began to spread among searchers. Some claimed they had heard singing, not close, but far off, thin and high, the unmistakable sound of children's voices drifting through the trees. Yet it was not the laughter of play, nor the cheerful songs they had sung at the river. It was something stretched, unnatural, as if sung in a language no one could name. The notes long and bent like something alive. A group of men swore they had seen lights moving deep in the forest, faint and shifting, circling as though held by unseen hands. Yet when they pushed toward them, the lights flickered and vanished, leaving only darkness. One farmer stumbled back into camp, pale as death, swearing he had seen a line of small figures moving between the trees, their faces hidden, their steps soundless, as if they were walking not on earth but above it. His words were met with fearful silence, for no one dared accuse him of lying, though no one wanted to believe him either. Back at camp, the preacher fell to his knees in the dirt, Bible open before him, his voice breaking as he cried aloud that this was God's judgment upon them, that the Lord had taken their children as punishment for sins unnamed. His words sent shivers through the crowd, but not all believed. Others whispered darker things, voices tight and low, that this was not the work of heaven, but of something far older, far crueler, that the woods themselves demanded blood and had taken it. The oldest among them muttered a single word, sacrifice, and crossed themselves with trembling hands. Mothers clutched their infants tighter, terrified that the ground itself might open beneath them. Fathers loaded their guns and vowed to tear the forest apart if it took them till dawn. But the forest did not yield. It never gave back so much as a thread of cloth, a footprint, or a cry. It held its silence like a coffin lid, while in the distance, far off where no lantern could reach, faint laughter sometimes floated on the wind, carrying across the river until it seemed to fade into the water itself. The disappearance of 97 children from a church picnic in 193, too, was not merely an event, it was a wound that never closed. A shadow cast across the Brazos Valley that stretched far beyond that summer, swallowing whole generations in whispers, fear, and unanswered prayers. And, in the weeks that followed the tragedy, the countryside was scoured with a desperation that bordered on madness, for every able-bodied man who could ride took to the fields and woods, rifles strapped across their shoulders, lanterns swaying in the night as they plunged into thickets of mesquite and cedar, their voices hoarse from shouting the names of children who never answered, while mothers, their eyes red and hollow, paced the riverbanks with skirts trailing in the mud, clutching scraps of clothing left behind at the picnic as though scent alone might guide them back to their little ones. The Texas Rangers were called hard-eyed men on horseback with weathered faces that gave nothing away, men who had seen murder, outlaw raids, and lynchings, but who admitted quietly among themselves that never before had they encountered anything of this scale. For to lose one child was sorrow, to lose 97 was unthinkable, an impossibility that strained the edges of sanity itself. Bloodhounds were brought in from counties away, great beasts straining against their handlers, noses pressed to the earth where the children's bare feet had last touched. Yet even the dogs faltered, whimpering in confusion, their tracks leading in circles before ending at the river, as if the trail had been washed clean by some hand greater than rain. Boats were sent out to drag the river, nets cast wide, hooks and lines combing the slow current, but the Brazos gave back nothing except silt and weeds, and those who dipped their hands into its depths swore the water felt wrong, colder than it should have been. And one fisherman whispered that when he closed his eyes he felt the water moving, not against his skin but beneath it, like tiny hands pushing, urging him to let go. Wells across the valley were emptied, buckets lowering into the black depths, echoing against stone as men
peered down with torches, half afraid they would see pale faces staring back, but each well was silent, dry of anything except water and shadow. Caves along the limestone bluffs were searched by torchlight, men crawling on hands and knees, scraping their palms raw on the jagged rock as they pressed deeper into the earth, only to emerge choking on dust, coughing into their sleeves. Their torches guttered and nearly out, their eyes wide with the unshakable certainty that something had been in there with them, something just beyond the edge of light that slipped away each time they turned. And still, nothing. Not a scrap of fabric, not a shoe print in the mud, not a cry carried on the wind. The only clue came from a farmer miles downstream, who claimed to have found a wicker basket wedged between rocks on the riverbank, its weave split and broken from water, and inside, resting like some cruel token, a single child's shoe, the laces neatly tied, the leather unstained by mud as though it had never touched the earth. When the basket was brought back to the congregation, mothers fought to claim it, sobbing, swearing it belonged to their child, though no name could be sewn into the worn soul, and in the end the preacher buried it himself in the churchyard, declaring it the only grave he could give to the 97. After that, the church doors never opened again, for the building seemed poisoned, its wooden beams creaking like bones whenever the wind pushed through, its windows shivering with a sound like muffled cries. The bell, once rung with pride to call the faithful to worship, was taken down and locked away in silence, though some swore that even in the night they could hear it toll faintly, not from the steeple, but from somewhere beneath the earth, muffled and sorrowful, a call to children who would never answer. The pews rotted, the hymnals curled with mildew and from beneath the abandoned church, vibrating through the stones until the floorboards trembled. A few claimed to have seen figures then, 97 small shadows gathered in a line along the far bank of the river, their forms blurred, their faces hidden, as they swayed in time to the song, only to vanish when the hymn ended, leaving behind silence so deep it crushed the breath from the lungs. For years, investigators tried to close the case, declaring it unsolvable, lost to history, yet no one truly accepted that. Some said it had been a mass kidnapping, though no wagon tracks were ever found, no signs of struggle. Others whispered of pagan rituals, of old sacrifices tied to the river's hunger, of debts paid in flesh to keep the land from failing entirely during the Depression. And some, fewer still, muttered in tones barely above breath that the children had not been taken at all, that they had gone willingly, lured by something unseen, called into the woods by a voice they trusted, a voice that sang sweeter than their mother's lullabies. Whatever the truth, it remained hidden, buried in silence, but the curse endured, pressing down on the valley like heat in summer, endless and suffocating. Even today, when storms roll across the Brazos and the sky turns black, locals swear that lightning reveals shapes in the clouds, rows of children walking hand in hand, their outlines white against the storm, their faces turned toward the river below. Travelers along the old road sometimes hear footsteps keeping pace beside them, though no one walks in the ditch, and in rare moments, when the wind stills and the air grows heavy, they say you can hear it again. The hymn of 97 voices, carried forever on the Texas wind, belonging to children who never came home, children who remain neither lost nor found, but forever caught in the moment they vanished, lingering like a scar carved into the land.